He came to fix the lighthouse. The lonely keeper's son asked, "Will you stay until the storm passes?" The road to the lighthouse was little more than a muddy trail, carved into the cliffs, slick with sea mist, scattered with jagged stones. Aurelian Knox had wrestled his cart uphill for hours, each wheel squealing beneath the weight of tools and spare parts, until finally the great silhouette rose against the horizon. The lighthouse stood tall and battered, its white paint weathered into grey streaks, the iron balcony corroded like an old wound. To Aurelian's eyes, it looked less like a beacon of safety and more like a relic trying to resist its own ruin. He pushed the cart to the base of the steps, wiped his hands across his trousers. The air here was sharp, filled with salt and the faint tang of kelp. He had repaired dozens of structures in his life, barns sagging with rot, bridges swallowed by moss. But nothing carried the same solemn aura as this tower of stone. It was not just a building, it was a sentinel. The heavy door creaked before he even knocked. A boy no taller than Aurelian's chest peeked out. His hair was dark as wet sand clinging to his brow, and in his small hands he clutched a seashell like it was a sword. "You're the man for the lamp," the boy asked, his voice trembling as though the question was larger than him. Aurelian cleared his throat. "That's right. Name's Aurelian Knox. I was sent by the coast office to fix what's broken." The boy's eyes darted to the darkening sky. A growl of thunder rolled far out at sea. He tightened his grip on the seashell. "Will you stay until the storm passes?" Aurelian hesitated. His orders were simple: replace the shattered glass of the lantern, mend the rusted gears, check the oil lines, and leave before nightfall. He had not planned for hospitality, nor for a storm that came sooner than expected. Before he could answer, a woman stepped into view behind the boy. She was tall, her frame thin but steady. Long hair bound back in a scarf, once red, but now faded into muted rose. Her eyes, however, were what struck Aurelian. Grey, storm-coloured, heavy as if they had seen too many nights of waiting. "Thire," she said softly, laying a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Don't trouble the man. He has work to do." "I wasn't troubling the boy," mumbled, staring at the seashell. The woman looked up at Aurelian, her expression polite but guarded. "Celine Harrow, keeper of this light since my husband, since I took over. You'll find the stairs in need of repair as much as the lantern." Aurelian gave a curt nod. "I'll see what I can do." She stepped aside and he entered. The air inside was colder, heavy with damp stone and the faint musk of oil. Narrow stairs wound upward. From above came the groan of metal straining in the wind. The boy trailed close behind, barefoot on the boards. The climb revealed the tower's scars, cracks creeping along the walls, patches where salt had chewed through mortar. At the top, the lantern chamber was, as he had been told, its great glass panes fractured, one entirely missing, shards scattered like frozen rain across the floor. The gear assembly that turned the lamp was rusted stiff. Every gust of wind rattled the frame, until it seemed the whole mechanism might collapse. Aurelian set down his tool bag and exhaled. "This'll take more than a day." From behind him, Celine's voice carried up the stairs. "Then you'll have to stay. The tide's already rising. No boat will make it back to town tonight." He turned. She stood halfway up, one hand braced on the railing, the other holding a lantern that flickered weakly in the draught. Shadows etched deeper lines into her face. Though she could not have been more than 30, she had the look of someone worn not by years, but by solitude. "Do you mind company in your quarters?" Aurelian asked carefully. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "We mind storms more than company. You'll have a bed. Not a good one, but it will keep you dry." That night, after hours of prying at rusted bolts and cataloguing the missing parts, Aurelian descended to the keeper's quarters. The space was cramped but homely. Shelves lined with jars of herbs and preserved fruit, a hearth where driftwood burned low, a table marked by candle wax. Thea sat cross-legged on the floor, arranging shells in careful rows, each one polished by the sea. Do you collect them? Aurelian asked, lowering himself into a chair. The boy nodded. They're soldiers. They protect the lighthouse. Celine ladled stew into bowls without looking up. Eat while it's warm. The storm will rattle the windows before long. Outside rain began its steady assault, tapping first against the panes, then escalating into a roar. Lightning flared across the horizon, lighting the room in quick, stark flashes. For a moment, Aurelian saw Selene's face illuminated, calm yet distant, as though part of her was always somewhere else watching the sea. He took a sip of the stew. The broth was thin, but the warmth sank into his chest after the long climb. How long have you been tending this light? He asked. Since my husband's ship never returned, she said simply, not lifting her gaze from her bowl. Thayer shifted uncomfortably, placing his shell soldiers in a circle, as though guarding against invisible enemies. Aurelian said nothing more. The storm outside filled the silence with its relentless voice, and for the first time that evening, he realized he was trapped, not only by weather, but by the weight of grief that lived in these walls. Later, lying on a narrow cot in a side room, he listened to the sea batter the cliffs. The tower groaned like a living thing, and beneath it all, faint but clear, he thought he heard a child's whisper drifting through the hall. Don't leave us like he did. Morning came slow, wrapped in grey fog. The restless hum of waves slammed against rock. Aurelian rose from the narrow cot, his back stiff, his ears still full of the storm's growl. The lighthouse seemed to breathe around him, stone walls exhaling damp, wood beams groaning with every shift of the wind. He dressed quickly, pulled on his work jacket, climbed the spiraling stairs toward the lantern room. At the top, he found Celine already there, her scarf tied tighter, sleeves rolled up as she scrubbed away shards of glass with deliberate care. The broken panes looked like jagged teeth in the morning light. She glanced at him, but said nothing. I'll need to strip the gear assembly first, Aurelian muttered. He knelt beside the rusted contraption, tugged at one of the cogs. The metal screeched like an animal in pain. It's been left too long without grease. Celine's tone was even, though it carried the edge of defense. I've done what I could. My hands weren't made for iron. He paused, studied her briefly. There was no shame in her words, only exhaustion. He returned to the gears, prying them free with stubborn patience. Thayer arrived with quiet steps, carrying 2 cups of steaming water. He offered one to Aurelian, who accepted with a nod. Careful with your hands, lad. This iron bites. The boy lingered, his eyes fixed on the lantern. If the light dies, ships crash. Mama says it's our duty to keep it alive. Aurelian sipped the hot water, letting the boy's solemnity hang in the air. That's true, but every keeper needs a little help. The storm had not passed. If anything, it thickened. Sheets of rain lashed against the glassless frame, spraying cold mist into the chamber. Celine called Thayer down before he caught a chill, but Aurelian remained, working steadily as hours stretched. He replaced corroded bolts, hammered bent brackets, laid out tools in neat lines, each clang echoing down the spiral shaft. By afternoon, hunger pulled him down to the quarters. Celine set bread and dried fish on the table, the simple meal heavy with silence. Aurelian chewed slowly, listening to the storm grind against the tower. His eyes wandered. The shelves along the far wall held rows of books, their spines warped with damp. Beside them sat a small desk, a drawer slightly ajar. Inside, faint edges of paper peeked out, all sealed with wax imprints of an anchor, naval letters untouched. He hadn't meant to stare, but Celine caught his glance. Her hand froze mid-motion, a slice of bread resting in her palm. They were meant for my husband, she said, her voice low, almost brittle. The sea took him before they could. Aurelian nodded gently, though curiosity gnawed at him. And you've never opened them. Her gaze sharpened. Would you? If the words inside only confirmed what you already feared. The weight of her answer silenced him. Thayer, oblivious to the tension, nibbled his bread, arranging crumbs into little lines, as if they too were soldiers. The afternoon stretched longer than the morning. Repairs went slower than he hoped. The lantern could not yet turn, its rusted teeth refusing to yield. Rain found its way through every gap, dripping onto the stone floor in steady rhythms. When dusk arrived, Selina lit oil lamps around the quarters, their glow soft against the storm's fury outside. She settled into a chair near the hearth, knitting with thin yarn. Aurelian sat opposite, the day's labour weighing on his arms. "You said the sea took him." Aurelian began carefully. "Was it a storm like this?" Selene's needles paused mid-loop. For a long moment the only sound was the crackle of fire. "Worse," she whispered, "the kind that swallows a horizon." He promised he'd be back by spring, and Thaya waited on the cliffs every day. But the sea, it doesn't keep promises. Her hands trembled, the yarn tangling. She set it aside, pressed her palms together tightly, as though holding something fragile from shattering. Thaya looked up from his shells. "Mama says the lighthouse is cursed. That's why Papa didn't come home." The boy's words hung like frost. Aurelian frowned, glanced at Selene, but she turned her face to the fire, eyes glistening. "People in town say things," she said flatly. "They say I drove him to it, that I kept him at sea too long." Aurelian leaned back, the storm rattling the shutters as though punctuating her confession. He thought of the unopened letters, of grief hardened into rumour. His chest tightened, not from judgment, but from the sudden aching loneliness that clung to this place like mist. Later, while searching for spare screws among a clutter of boxes, Aurelian's hand brushed against the same drawer he had glimpsed earlier. It slid open with little effort. The letters inside seemed endless, edges curled by damp, seals unbroken. His fingers hovered over them. Behind him, Selene's voice struck like a blade. "Leave them." He turned. She stood in the doorway, her lantern throwing her face half into light, half into shadow. "They were not written for me," she said, each word sharp, deliberate, "and I will not rob the dead of what was theirs." The drawer slammed shut. Silence swelled between them, broken only by the storm clawing at the walls. Aurelian swallowed his questions, but that night as he lay in the dark, he couldn't escape the image of those unopened seals. He wondered what truths lay locked within them, truths that perhaps explained why a keeper's son still whispered, "Don't leave us like he did." The storm screamed louder, as though mocking the thought of escape, and Aurelian, staring at the ceiling, began to understand. Some storms did not simply pass, they lingered, they consumed. The third day in the lighthouse began with a deceptive calm. The rain had lessened to a mist. The waves no longer pounded the rocks with blind fury. For a moment, Aurelian thought the storm was breaking, but as he stood on the iron balcony, watching the horizon shift and writhe with dark clouds, he knew it was only the sea catching its breath. The real violence had yet to come. Inside, Selene moved quietly through the quarters, preparing what little food remained. The bread had gone stale, the dried fish nearly finished. Thaya sat at the table, polishing his seashell soldiers, humming softly to himself. Aurelian rolled up his sleeves, determined to force progress on the stubborn gear assembly. He needed to keep busy. The stillness of the lighthouse carried too many voices, echoes of grief, whispers of things unsaid. He spent the morning hammering, prying sanding rust until his arms ached, yet no matter how he tried to lose himself in the work. The drawer of letters lingered in his mind. It wasn't just curiosity. It was the sense that Selene's silence weighed heavier than the storm outside. By midday, the sound of footsteps echoed up the spiral stair. When Aurelian looked down, he saw two figures approaching from below, fishermen from town, cloaked in oilskins, their boots dripping seawater. One carried a sack of provisions, the other a lantern that flickered nervously against the damp walls. Selene met them at the door, her face tightening. "We brought supplies," the taller fisherman said. He set the sack on the table, his voice clipped more obligation than kindness. "But we can't stay. The sea's turning mean again." The shorter one cast a glance around the quarters, his eyes resting on Aurelian. And who's this, then? Another fool trapped in the Harrow curse, Selena's lips pressed into a thin line. He's here to fix the lamp. The man snorted. Fix the lamp, eh? The sea doesn't care for lamps. It took your husband right under this very light, didn't it? Thea bristled. Don't say that about Papa. The fisherman's gaze softened briefly on the boy, then hardened again as he looked back at Selene. Ships keep vanishing near this shore and folks talk. They say it's no storm, but a curse carried in these walls. Aurelian set down his wrench with a metallic thud. That's enough. The man smirked but didn't argue. He tipped his dripping hat and muttered, Keep your ghosts, then. And with that, he disappeared back into the rain with his companion. The door shut with a heavy thump. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Selene stood frozen, her hands clenched. Thea's eyes shone with unshed tears. Aurelian broke the stillness. Is that what the town believes? That you cursed your own husband? Her voice was brittle. They need someone to blame, and the sea won't answer their questions. She turned abruptly, strode up the stairs, leaving Aurelian and the boy alone. Thea looked at him with wide, pleading eyes. It isn't true. Mama didn't make the sea take him. Did she? Aurelian knelt, rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. No storm cares what a person says or does. The sea takes, because that's what it does. The boy's grip tightened around his seashell. Then why won't they stop saying it? Aurelian had no answer. He could only watch as the boy retreated to his corner, arranging his shell soldiers as though preparing them for war against unseen enemies. The afternoon dragged on with heavier silence than before. Selene did not come down from the lantern chamber when Aurelian climbed the stairs to check on her. He found her standing at the cracked glass, staring out at the endless grey horizon. Her scarf had slipped. Hair tumbled across her shoulders, damp with mist. You should go when the storm breaks, she said, without turning. You don't want their whispers following you. I don't answer to whispers, Aurelian replied. And I've work here not yet finished. Her eyes shifted to him then, sharp, searching, as though trying to gauge if he truly meant it. Work, she repeated softly. That's all it is for you. The question lingered longer than he expected. He thought of the boy's small hand clutching his, the way Selene's voice cracked when she spoke of her husband, the unopened letters, lined like soldiers in their own silent war. Before he could answer, a violent crash of thunder shook the chamber. Rain poured in sheets. Wind shrieked through the gaps. The sea was rising for its next assault. That night, the lighthouse became a fortress against chaos. The waves struck the cliffs with a fury that shook the stone beneath their feet. Windows rattled, shutters banged, the oil lamps flickered dangerously. Thea clung to Aurelian's side, his seashell pressed tight in his fist. It sounds like it's going to break the world, he whispered. Aurelian drew him closer, steadying his voice. The world's stronger than any storm, lad. And so are we. Down the hall, Selene sat at the table, her hands resting on the sealed letters as though guarding them. She didn't speak, but in her silence, Aurelian sensed the war she waged within herself, between truth and memory, grief and survival. As lightning split the sky and thunder roared like cannon fire, Aurelian realized something chilling. This family wasn't just trapped by weather. They were bound by secrets thicker than the fog, secrets that had kept them prisoners long before he arrived, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing within these salt-stained walls. The storm did not ease. By the fourth day, it had grown into something monstrous, an endless howl that shook the tower at its roots. The sea clawed higher. Spray burst through the broken lantern chamber. Every few hours, Aurelian checked the bracing he'd set on the gears, but it was a losing battle against rust and water. Selene had grown quieter. She barely spoke at meals, her eyes fixed on the fire as though it might answer questions she could not voice. Thea hovered close to Aurelian, shadowing his steps, carrying small tools, handing him bolts with a seriousness far older than his 9 years. The tension snapped one evening. Aurelian descended from the lantern chamber soaked with sweat and salt. He found Celine sitting at the table again. The drawer opened before her. The letters lay scattered across the wood. Wax seals unbroken, paper curling at the edges. Her hands hovered above them, trembling. "You should read them," Aurelian said softly. She flinched. Her grey eyes darted up to his. "No, they are his. They don't belong to me. They might carry answers," he pressed. "Or at least peace." Her voice rose, sharp as a breaking wave. "Peace. Do you think I want their words to carve truth into stone, that I want to see his last orders, his last breaths written by another man's hand?" Thea stirred in the corner, startled by her tone. Celine noticed. Her voice broke into a whisper. "If I read them, then there is no hope left. He is gone, and all that remains are words that cannot bring him home." Aurelian moved closer. He lowered his voice. "Celine, you're drowning in silence. The boy is growing up on rumors and half-truths. He deserves more than that." Her jaw tightened. "You don't know what I deserve, or what I've done." The words chilled him. For a heartbeat, lightning lit her face. And it was not grief he saw there. It was guilt. Later that night, the storm battered the shutters. The door to the keeper's quarters banged open. It was one of the fishermen from town, the shorter man from before. His oilskin coat was torn, his face pale with fury and fear. "You've cursed us again," he shouted. Rain spilled in with him. "2 more boats lost last night, my brother among them. You'll rot in this tower for what you've done." Thea cried out and clung to Celine. Aurelian stepped between them. "That's enough. You think storms bow to curses." The fisherman jabbed a shaking finger toward Celine. She kept her man at sea too long, demanded more pay, more cargo. Everyone knows it. She doomed him. And now the sea takes others to punish her. Celine's face went white. Her lips parted. But no words came. "Go," Aurelian ordered, his voice low and steady, "before I throw you into the tide myself." The fisherman spat on the floor, then stormed back into the rain. The door slammed shut behind him. Silence fell again, broken only by Thea's sobs. Aurelian turned to Celine, but she would not meet his eyes. "Is it true," he asked quietly, "what he said about your husband?" Her hands shook as she gripped the table edge. At last she whispered, "I begged him to take one last voyage, one more cargo run before the season turned. He didn't want to, but I pressed. I said we needed the coin, that Thea needed a better life." Tears blurred her gaze as she forced the words out. "The storm took him that trip, and every day since I've heard his silence louder than the sea." Aurelian felt the weight of her confessions settle like stone in his chest. The town's whispers had teeth because Selina herself believed them. She had condemned herself long before anyone else did. Thea looked between them, wide-eyed, not fully understanding, but sensing the gravity. "Mama, you didn't make the sea angry, did you?" Selene collapsed to her knees. She pulled him close. "No, my love. The sea is angry on its own. But I pushed him when I should have held him back." Aurelian knelt beside them. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Storms take without reason. You cannot carry blame for the ocean." But her eyes, glassy with sorrow, told him she wasn't ready to believe that. The storm howled louder, battering the lighthouse as if in response to her words. And Aurelian, caught between the fury outside and the confession within, realized the real battle was not against rust or waves. It was against a grief that had turned into a curse of its own making. And if he could not help her lift it, the boy would inherit it too. By dawn, the storm slackened at last, but its wreckage was everywhere. The beach below the cliffs was littered with broken masts, barrels, nets torn to ribbons. The town's bells tolled in mourning. Their hollow clang carried on the damp wind. Aurelian repaired the last of the lamp's gears in silence, his hands steady, though his thoughts were not. He had come to fix a machine, but what he uncovered was heavier than rusted steel. Every time Selene entered the lantern room, pale in the waning light, he felt the weight of her confession pressed tighter around them. On the sixth morning, the townsfolk climbed the slope toward the lighthouse. They brought more than supplies. Anger, fear, suspicion followed in their wake. The fisherman who had stormed in days earlier stepped forward. His voice was raw. 3 dead, 2 more missing. You'll answer for this, Selene. She stood before them without flinching, though her hands trembled at her sides. If you want someone to blame, blame me, she said. I begged him to sail that night. I pushed him to the sea. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Aurelian moved to her side. No. Blame the waves. Blame the storm. Blame the years of rot in your own hulls. But do not chain your grief to hers, the fisherman sneered. You speak like you know her. I know enough, Aurelian said. His voice rose with conviction. She's carried more than any of you. Kept the lamp burning when half this town would have let it die. Without her, more ships would have been lost long ago. You owe her your harbour, even if you won't admit it. The silence that followed was taut as rigging in a gale. Then an older woman in the crowd spoke softly, almost grudgingly. The lamp was lit last night. I saw it through the rain. More voices joined, hesitant, weighing his words against their grief. The fisherman's fury faltered under the tide of doubt. He spat once more in the dirt, then turned away, leading the others back down the slope. When they were gone, Selene's strength broke. She sank against the wall of the tower, her face buried in her hands. You shouldn't have defended me, she whispered. You'll only share my curse. Aurelian knelt beside her. Curses are nothing but grief we let linger. You can't banish a storm, Selene, but you can choose not to live inside it forever. For the first time her eyes lifted to his without flinching. There was something fragile in them, like a flame struggling to catch. Later, when the lantern was repaired and the horizon cleared, Selene stood with Thea at the gallery. The boy leaned over the railing, his laughter startlingly bright after so many hushed days. The sea below was calm, the kind of calm that comes only after violence. Selene's hand found Aurelian's arm. It was not a plea, nor a promise, only a quiet acknowledgement. He met her gaze, and in it he saw not absolution, but the beginning of release. The lighthouse rose behind them, scarred but standing. Its beam swept across the waters once more, steady and unbroken. And in the hush that followed the storm, Aurelian understood some wounds never heal cleanly, but even broken lights can guide the lost back home. As the storm fades and the lighthouse beam cuts through the dark once more, I wonder how many of us carry storms inside, blaming ourselves for tides we could never control. Sometimes the hardest journey is forgiving our own hearts. What burdens have you carried that weren't truly yours to bear? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more.